Welcome back to another leadership film study. If you've been following this series, you know that we're not here to point fingers or critique people. We're here to study leadership the same way athletes study game film, to ask, what can we learn that helps us become better leaders? And today's episode is one that I am especially passionate about because it's something I see happen all the time in our industry. Businesses spend years building trust with a guest and then destroy that trust in a single conversation about a policy. The truth is, this episode isn't really about cancellation policies. It's about leadership, it's about hospitality, and it's about whether we are protecting relationships or simply protecting rules. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in leadership is that being kind means you don't have standards. I actually believe the opposite is true. The very best leaders have incredibly high standards, but they deliver those standards with hospitality. They don't make people choose between feeling respected and being held accountable. They do both.
And we get it. Every business needs policies. Policies create clarity and consistency, but policies were never meant to replace human connection. You see, in hospitality and honestly, in leadership as a whole, we're playing the long game. There are not infinite guests. There are not infinite relationships. So every interaction is an opportunity to either strengthen trust or weaken it.
Yeah. And as you listen today, here's the question we want you to think about. When someone runs into one of your policies, do they leave feeling cared for or controlled? Because most people won't remember the exact wording of your cancellation policy. They'll remember how you made them feel when life happened. Today we want to share a recent experience that we had, not because the policy itself was wrong, but because of how it was communicated. And, this video is great. So as you listen, we want you to ask yourself, if I were on the receiving end of this interaction, would I leave feeling welcomed or warned? Here we go.
I understand. The problem is that when you don't show up, because your appointment started 30 minutes ago, when you don't show up, my stylists lose out on. Yeah. Right. No, I understand. Unfortunately, the only exceptions that we have are for an emergency. Okay, I understand that it's out of your control, but that doesn't constitute an emergency. Right. So for us, when you don't show up, there is a cancellation fee because my stylist now is sitting with a block of 3 hours that she can't be making money. Yeah, no, she needs to feed her family as well. So I always explain to people, like, imagine if you got called into work and you were there for 3 hours and they go, oh, we actually can't pay you for those 3 hours. Is that okay? Like, you wouldn't. No, I understand she's not doing the service today. No, okay. See, I'm trying to explain it to you and you keep interrupting me. So if I could just have the floor for like a minute and then maybe we could come to an Yeah. So unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to rebook you until you pay that cancel. No, I understand she didn't do the full service. Yeah, but she's still here and she's. Okay. Well, if you decide that you would like to pay off your balance and rebook, then you absolutely may do that. But until then, I hope you have a great day. Dude. No, I understand.
All right. That was our film study for the day. Jen, what stood out to you?
Well, if you're not seeing the video, it was a salon owner. She must have been calling that guest. And so you could see her interactions. And we couldn't hear on the receiving end what the potential guest was saying. But I could, like, I put myself in the position of being a guest. Like, it just felt like a lot of force. And maybe I was wrong as a guest. Maybe I did miss my appointment. But I think there's still a more tasteful way to handle that, because then when you have two emotional people that are angry, no one's going to win in that situation. And so, I think there's a beautiful opportunity to think about a new way to approach that.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that stood out to me too, is that I always think, to never invite the opportunity for someone to lie to you. When your policy talks about emergencies only versus, like, I just think, hey, I don't want to start like an excuse auction. Like, whoever has the best excuse for not showing up, you get out of it. You know what I mean? Because, like, who am I to decide what constitutes an emergency? You know what I mean? Like, things happen all the time that are unexpected. And I think, of course, some things like are more catastrophic, and you either can't get somewhere or your mind isn't in the right place to call and handle an appointment. Stuff like that happens. But sometimes people, it misses their schedule at the right time or whatever that happens. So I just know, like, with our policy, we're like, hey, the first time, we believe in second chances. Just like if for some reason somebody's hair doesn't turn out the perfect way on the first time, like, we believe in second chances. Let's get a second chance to do this right. You get a second chance to show up to your appointments. I think when we start to get into that, like, we are the ones who get to decide what constitutes that or not. Like, why don't you just say, like, hey, like, everybody gets one get out of jail free card. And, because it's usually like, if it's somebody who's a repeat offender, if they do it again, like, that's when I believe, like, yes, then you absolutely have to have policies to protect people. Because, I don't know about you, but I've had people on my team call in sick before. And if you're listening, maybe you've called in sick before. And, I know, Jen, you've hardly ever called in sick before, less than 5 times on your hand in your whole career. Same with me, and I think, gosh, on those times, like, I'm not the person who calls in sick all the time. I'm not the person who last minute cancels or no shows all the time, but that is going to happen. And if we want people to, forgive us and to understand us when life happens, then we get the opportunity to do the same thing for our people that we serve.
Yeah. It's a beautiful way to say it, Lindsay. I think as salon owners that are listening to this, I mean, just an opportunity is to pull your, cancellation policy and to look at it and think about, hey, are my policies protecting my business or my fear? Right. And it's easy as salon owners to listen to your team because they are consuming social media all day long, and probably 90% of what they see is from a booth renter that's saying, here's my cancellation policy, protect our time, we need boundaries. So of course they think that we need to stick this to clients. But truly, when you're creating a brand, you're creating that hospitable experience. Like, what does that truly look like? And is that policy going to expand people or prevent people from wanting to come back? So ask yourself, hey, has someone read our cancellation policy today? Would they feel welcomed or would they feel warmed? And, I think, go ahead, Lindsay. I think you were going to say something.
Oh, no, we were probably headed down the same path because, we recently just had an experience ourselves with a 5-star hotel where we were supposed to take a trip, and Jen's beautiful grandmother, Edna, lived a very full 82 years of life. 83 years of life.
Yeah.
That was who she bought the salon from, and, has been carrying on that legacy. She just passed this past week, and 2 days before we were supposed to head out to Newport to stay in a hotel. And, first of all, Edna was such a pioneer in our industry. And so I just want to, give her a shout out, because I know that she put so many things into play, Jen, that not only have you amplified and carried on, but like you've taught to me and to so many of our viewers. And so I just think, first of all, I just want to acknowledge Edna is a little baddie. And I think that there's
Mhm.
so many unsung heroes in our industry, just like Edna, that, she is just a beautiful example of so many people who paved the way to really bring true beauty into the beauty industry. So I just want to acknowledge her, first and foremost, but also to say, then when we called the hotel that we were supposed to stay at, Jen, you were met with a lot of resistance and force. And, I think the one thing that stood out to both of us is there's a huge difference between enforcing a policy and being forceful with a policy. And I think, that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me on that. Like, it was like they were already angry at the guest. And when you're met with that kind of force and that kind of energy, like, I don't know the context behind why that guest canceled on that call, but I do know the context behind why we had to. We were just gonna postpone our trip, 2 weeks. We were able to get back in, but the energy that you were met with, like, that damages relationships, like that
Mhm.
breaks trust that sometimes you're never able to rebuild.
Mhm. Yeah, we were past the deadline of I think it was 72 hours or something for the cancellation policy.
Mhm.
And, I understand it wasn't even about like, hey, I'm a responsible person. If I need to
Mhm.
pay the cancellation policy, whatever, it is what it is. We'll figure it out, right?
Yeah.
But it was just the energy that came with it. I shared
Mhm.
my experience, what was going on in my life, and she's like, "Ugh, well," and it was just
Mhm.
like I was an inconvenience to her almost. She's like, "Oh, well, we don't do that, but I guess I can ask my manager. I'll put you on a brief hold and I'll come back." And so she'd put
Mhm.
me on hold and I was on hold for a while. So just sitting there on
Mhm.
hold, right? And it's an emotional time. Like my grandmother was a special person. So I'm like, okay, we're
Mhm.
trying to get things done. Let's get this
Mhm.
get moving. She'd
Mhm.
come back on and she'd be like, "Yeah, well, we don't normally do this, but if we do this, you're going to have to make sure that it's the same amount or more if we change your reservation." Well,
Mhm.
when we were going to be able to go back, it was going to be one less day more or one
Mhm.
day less. And so
Mhm.
that wasn't going to be possible. And, it was just like everything was like, I mean, I should have counted how many. Like how many inconveniences it was for her.
Yeah.
And finally, when you're kind of in that emotional state, I said, you know what? I'll just pay the cancellation policy
Mhm.
and move forward, and hung up. And we called back and
Mhm.
spoke to, or Lindsay called back and spoke to someone else later and kind of got it handled. But like in that moment when you're already carrying something heavy in your life, and then you
Mhm.
have people that pour into that from a standpoint of like, you're still like, well, that's not my fault you're canceling. It's our policy. That's what I'm here to do. It's like,
Mhm.
wow, this is a five-star hotel. Cause I asked, I was like, this is a
Mhm.
five-star hotel. You guys are in the hospitality business. And so, like,
Mhm.
this isn't even about the cancellation policy anymore. It's about the way we treat people.
Yeah. And I think that that's what it comes down to is it isn't about the policy. It's about the way that we treat people. And, to me, it's really sad when people leave with policies, you know, over relationships, because I believe that relationships are the most important part. And of course, you do not want anybody to abuse you. We are not saying that. We get that people have bills to pay, they have
Mhm.
lives, but like that's also why our pricing calculator, like we tell you, hey, here's some industry standards around cancellations, around no shows. Like this is going to protect your people so that they don't feel a huge loss when they do get
Mhm.
that one cancellation out of 100. That's gonna happen. We plan for it, we expect it, and so that we know that going in so that we can protect that relationship. Like, hey, it's okay,
Mhm.
stuff happens, we understand. And more importantly, when it is a big life event like that, we can be like, hey, I'm so sorry, like, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm sure this is, not how you had anticipated to spend your weekend, because like
Mhm.
even thinking from a hotel standpoint, they'd rather be there. And also, if you're creating such a magical experience, they would much rather be there with you as well. I just recently saw somebody on a local, Facebook group that she, as an advertisement, just posted her cancellation policy. And then I saw another like spa owner in our area, and somebody else commented like, yeah, tell them that, and they were just going off. And I thought, you had like, this is what you chose to advertise on here. This was the most important thing. And what's so sad is there was probably one guest that they need to have a conversation with that maybe is taking advantage of their time, and they can just be like, hey, Susie, I love you. But when we look at your history, this is, the second time it's happened. To protect both of our time moving forward, I'm just going to have you prepay for your appointment time. I know you're busy, but I want to be able to serve you to the highest good. And I want to respect both of our times. And so this is how we're able to do that, and I think that there is definitely a time and a place for that. But when you lead with that, man, that's really heartbreaking, actually.
That's so true. Because if you're creating an experience that people want to return to, you don't have to lead with those policies. They're just put there in place, as Lindsay was saying, for people who truly are those constant no-shows or flight risk.
Yeah. I think what struck us wasn't the policy. It wasn't the posture. They were simply enforcing a policy. They were leading with the policy instead of leading with the relationship. And I think that's where so many businesses unintentionally get it backwards. Policies should support relationships. Relationships should never become secondary to policies, because at the end of the day, we're not in the policy business. We're in the people business. Whether you own a salon or lead a team or, coach clients or run a hotel, your systems exist to serve people, not the other way around. And that's what we want you to unpack today.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that this really isn't about cancellation policies, as I said before. It's about how we make decisions when our values and our policies seem to collide. And I think that's what true hospitality is. Policies should create consistency. Hospitality should determine how we deliver them.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, building businesses that last for decades, not just businesses that win today. If you're playing the long game, every interaction matters. Every conversation is either making a deposit into the relationship or making a withdrawal. Sometimes extending a little grace, it can cost you an appointment today, but it earns you a client who stays with you for the next 10 years, and that's a trade that I'll make every single time.
Yeah. So this week, we'd love for you to pick one policy in your business and just read it through the eyes of a first-time guest. Does it sound like hospitality, or does it sound like a warning?
Yeah. Then ask yourself one more question. If someone had to hear no from us, how could we still make them feel cared for? Because great leaders know that people can accept disappointment if they still feel respected.
Hey, and thanks again for joining us for another leadership film study. We hope these conversations help you look at leadership just a little differently, not just through the lens of systems and policies, but through the lens of people.
Yeah, remember, every interaction isn't just shaping your reputation, or it is shaping your reputation, not just as a salon owner, but also as a leader. So build systems that support your business, build relationships that outlast those systems, because at the end of the day, people won't remember every policy you had. They'll remember how you made them feel when life happened. We'll see you next week for another leadership film study.